The ground holds a familiar shape. A shallow depression interrupts the plain, collecting what little shade the sun allows. The air above it carries a thin signal water, present but diminished. The distance is short enough to close without effort. The conditions appear aligned. In places like this, movement is expected. The animal slows. Not abruptly. Not in response to threat. The pace eases as if guided by a calculation that no longer matches the scene. The body remains oriented toward the depression, yet forward motion does not resume. The space between opportunity and action stretches without explanation. Wind moves across the surface, lifting dust and carrying scent unevenly. It arrives in fragments there, then gone, never settling long enough to confirm anything beyond presence. The depression remains unchanged. The shade holds. The signal persists. Still, the animal does not advance. This is not a pause born of exhaustion. The posture remains stable. Balance is intact. Strength has not yet begun to fail. The delay exists before depletion, before urgency, before the environment applies pressure. It occurs at a moment when instinct would normally resolve the situation quickly. Time accumulates. Heat continues its steady rise, drawing moisture from the ground and from skin alike. The opportunity does not diminish, but it does not improve either. The scene offers no new information, only repetition. Each second extends the distance, not in space, but in consequence. A step forward would close the gap. A step away would widen it. Neither occurs. The animal shifts its orientation slightly, altering alignment without committing to movement. The adjustment is minimal, almost unnoticeable, yet it changes the geometry of the moment. The depression is no longer directly ahead. The opportunity remains visible, but it no longer occupies the center of the frame. This deviation is small. It does not announce itself as a decision, but it alters what follows. The animal begins to move, not toward the depression, but across it, choosing a path that preserves distance rather than collapsing it. The shade slips to the side. The signal weakens. The ground ahead offers less, but it is predictable. From the outside, nothing dramatic has occurred. There is no danger revealed, no threat exposed, no failure recorded. The environment does not react. The opportunity remains where it is, untouched, unchanged, waiting for nothing. But the alignment has shifted. What was once an obvious response has been replaced by a conditional one. The rule that connected signal to action no longer triggers automatically. Something in the sequence has broken, not violently, not visibly, but decisively. The animal continues onward, carrying the deviation with it. Distance accumulates slowly at first, then more quickly as the depression recedes behind. Heat tightens its hold. The ground offers fewer interruptions now, fewer places where relief might gather. What could have been taken remains behind, not as loss, but as subtraction. The environment remains neutral. It does not punish the choice. It does not correct it. It simply allows it to stand. As movement continues, the deviation does not resolve. It persists, embedded in posture and pacing. The animal advances through terrain that offers no immediate replacement for what was left behind, no reassurance that the sequence will correct itself later. This is the moment the story begins, not with danger, not with collapse, but with a small misalignment between instinct and environment, one that costs nothing immediately, yet alters everything that follows. Something that once worked has been applied to a world that no longer responds the same way, and the distance between those two realities has just begun to grow. For a long time, the sequence was reliable. Signals appeared, movement followed, relief arrived. The order rarely changed. The environment rewarded timing that had been refined over generations, reinforcing behavior through repetition rather than instruction. When scent gathered low to the ground, it meant moisture. When shade held at certain angles, it marked places worth approaching. Distance could be measured against energy with confidence. The animal's movements were shaped by that consistency, not by decision, but by alignment. The body responded because response worked, Step and consequence matched often enough to remove hesitation from the process. When conditions presented themselves clearly, delay was unnecessary. Action closed the gap before cost accumulated. That alignment created efficiency. Movement minimized exposure. Pauses occurred where recovery was possible. Routes curved toward features that reliably offered relief. Then away again before depletion could settle. The land answered expectation often enough that expectation became habit. This was the old law. It did not require awareness. It required timing. Across wide stretches of terrain, the same patterns repeated. Depressions collected moisture. Wind carried scent predictably. Heat rose and fell within ranges that allowed recovery between efforts. Even scarcity followed cycles that could be anticipated. The animal's presence within this system was not dominant, but synchronized. When signals appeared early, action followed early. When signals weakened, movement adjusted. When relief diminished, distance expanded in proportion. The sequence absorbed error. Small delays did not matter because margins were wide. Deviations corrected themselves because the environment still responded within the same framework. Even when opportunities were missed, replacements appeared soon enough to compensate. This reliability shaped behavior without instruction. Approach when signal strengthens. Withdraw when signal fractures. Move when alignment holds. The body learned these rules by surviving under them. In that context, hesitation was unnecessary. Delay rarely improved outcome. Certainty, when it appeared, could be taken without consequence, because certainty did not attract additional cost. The environment was not neutral then. It was cooperative. Not forgiving, but consistent. Over time, this consistency removed the need for refinement. Precision dulled slightly because precision was no longer essential. Strength and timing covered minor inaccuracies. The system tolerated inefficiency because inefficiency remained within acceptable bounds. The animal's movement reflected this tolerance. Approaches were direct, corrections were minimal, signals were taken at face value. The sequence did not demand verification beyond presence. The land confirmed itself often enough to justify trust. This trust hardened into instinct, not belief, not confidence alignment, so ingrained it bypassed evaluation. When the depression formed and scent gathered, movement occurred because movement had always been rewarded there. The rule did not need to be tested again. It had already passed. That is what makes the present deviation notable. The animal's refusal to advance earlier was not caused by exhaustion or fear. It occurred before pressure applied. It interrupted a sequence that once resolved automatically. The old law failed to trigger its usual response. That failure suggests change, but not necessarily in the animal. The environment no longer reinforces the sequence at the same rate. Patterns that once delivered relief now do so intermittently. Signals arrive incomplete. Timing slips. Features that used to replenish energy now delay recovery or concentrate risk. The system still resembles its previous state, but its responses have shifted just enough to disrupt alignment. The rules remain visible, but their outcomes no longer match expectation. Under these conditions, the old law becomes dangerous. Action taken too early closes distance toward uncertainty. Delay taken too late compounds cost. The margin that once absorbed error has narrowed. What was once efficient becomes exposed. What was once safe becomes conditional. The animal continues to operate under rules that once worked because nothing has replaced them yet. The body still recognizes scent, still measures shade, still reads wind, but the environment answers less consistently. Sometimes relief arrives, sometimes it does not. Sometimes it arrives with consequence. Attached, attention drawn, space narrowed, recovery incomplete. The old law did not account for these additions. It assumed relief was neutral, not costly. That assumption no longer holds. The animal's movement reflects the tension between rule and response. When signals appear, the body prepares to advance, but preparation stalls. As if waiting for confirmation that never arrives, the sequence begins. This suspension is not adaptation yet. It is friction. The old law pulls forward. The altered environment resists. Movement becomes conditional, where it was once automatic. Each hesitation introduces delay. Each delay increases cost. The cycle tightens. The animal advances through a landscape that still resembles the one that shaped its behavior, but behaves differently enough to punish trust without warning. The environment does not announce this shift. There is no boundary where the old law ends and the new one begins. The change is distributed subtle enough to evade immediate recognition, severe enough to erode alignment over time. But they reduce replacement options later. Energy conserved through restraint must still be spent elsewhere. Distance not closed now must be covered under worse conditions later. The animal remains functional within this system, but its movements are no longer optimized for it. Strength compensates temporarily. Experience fills gaps briefly, but neither can restore alignment on their own. The old law depended on response-matching reward. The present environment decouples them. As this decoupling grows, the cost of operating under outdated rules increases. What once created efficiency now creates exposure. What once reduced risk now concentrates it. The animal's continued movement under these conditions is not error. It is inertia behavior carried forward because nothing has yet replaced it fully. This is the foundation of what follows. Not collapse, not failure, but persistence under a rule set that no longer fits the environment it was built for. The story does not hinge on whether the animal is strong enough. It hinges on whether alignment can be restored before the margin disappears entirely. And at this point, there is no evidence that it will be. The deviation repeats, not in the same place, not under the same conditions, but with the same result. Signals appear without resolution. Movement initiates without completion. The sequence advances, then stalls, leaving distance partially closed and cost partially paid. In the first instance, the delay seems inconsequential. The terrain ahead offers alternatives. Shade appears elsewhere. Scent thins, then returns in fragments. The animal adjusts its path slightly, choosing continuity over correction. What was left behind does not register as loss. It simply no longer belongs to the present frame. This is how delay hides its cost. The environment absorbs the omission at first. Energy expenditure increases marginally, not enough to disrupt pace. Recovery still occurs, though less efficiently. The system flexes, accommodating the deviation without visible consequence. But flexibility is finite. As movement continues, the pattern reappears. Another depression, another convergence of shade and signal. The response follows the same arc approach. Pause, redirection. The animal passes across opportunity rather than into it, preserving motion while allowing relief to remain unused. Each instance looks isolated. None appear decisive, yet the spacing between them matters. What would have been replenished twice is now deferred twice. The energy conserved through restraint must still be spent crossing less favorable ground later. Distance accumulates, not in kilometers, but in unrecovered effort. The environment does not correct this imbalance. It continues to offer partial replacements, minor shade, brief cooling, thin sustenance enough to prevent collapse, not enough to restore alignment. The animal remains mobile, functional, persistent. This persistence masks the shift underway. The second chapter begins when the delay compounds. Recovery becomes conditional. Pauses lengthen but restore less. Movement resumes heavier than before. The terrain ahead does not change, but the body's response to it does. Steps shorten slightly. Corrections occur more often. What was once smooth becomes segmented. The environment still presents signals, but timing no longer matches need. Relief appears either too early before cost demands it, or too late after depletion has already narrowed options. The old law assumed overlap. The present system separates them. When the animal reaches the next potential point of relief, the delay is already embedded. The pause extends longer than before. Not from doubt, but from recalibration. The body assesses without committing. balancing what remains against what may follow. Again, movement redirects. Nothing immediate happens. The animal continues, carrying the accumulated delay forward. Heat tightens more quickly now. Shade feels less effective. Cooling arrives later and fades sooner. These are not dramatic changes. They are incremental, easy to overlook without comparison. But comparison is no longer available. The previous baseline has slipped out of reach. What feels normal now is already degraded. The animal adapts to this reduced state without recognition, because recognition requires contrast. By the time the third opportunity passes unused, the environment has begun to narrow visibly. Alternatives thin, distance between favorable features increases. The ground offers fewer interruptions. Movement becomes more exposed. The animal's pace remains steady, but effort rises beneath it. This is where the second chapter takes shape. Delay no longer hides. The system's tolerance contracts. Small inefficiencies that once disappeared now persist. What was once absorbed now accumulates. The animal still operates under the same rules, but the environment enforces them more strictly. The next signal appears weaker than expected. Scent fractures quickly. Shade does not hold. The opportunity itself has degraded, arriving incomplete. Whether taken or refused, it would not fully resolve the deficit now present. The animal approaches, pauses, then redirects as before. The behavior remains consistent. The outcome does not. What was once a choice between equal paths is now a choice between insufficient ones. Delay has shifted the quality of opportunity, not just its timing. Movement continues. The ground ahead demands longer stretches without interruption. Exposure increases. Recovery windows shorten. The animal compensates by conserving where possible, reducing detours, maintaining direct paths, minimizing unnecessary adjustments. These compensations preserve motion, but they further reduce flexibility. The system has entered a feedback loop. Delay reduces recovery. Reduced recovery narrows options. Narrowed options make delay costlier. The animal remains unaware of the loop as a structure. It experiences only its effects: movement that feels heavier, pauses that do less, opportunities that no longer resolve what they once did. The environment remains neutral in appearance. Nothing signals urgency yet. No collapse occurs. The animal continues to move, still within its capacity, still upright, still advancing. This is what makes the shift dangerous. The consequences remain deferred. By the time the fourth opportunity appears, the system can no longer absorb another omission. The animal approaches, closer this time, not out of urgency, but necessity. The pause shortens, the redirection tightens, the choice compresses. Even so, the opportunity passes, not because the behavior changes, but because the environment no longer offers a version of relief that aligns with it. The old law requires clarity. The present system offers only fragments. The animal moves on with fewer reserves than before, carrying a deficit that now defines the path ahead. This is the point where delay becomes history. The cost is no longer theoretical. It has been converted into distance that must be crossed under worse conditions, effort that must be spent without replenishment, and options that will not return. The environment has not turned hostile. It has simply stopped compensating. What follows will not be about whether the animal can continue. It will be about how long the remaining margin can sustain a rule set that no longer fits the world enforcing it. The moment does not announce itself. There is no sudden shift in weather, no dramatic confrontation, no visible failure. The land ahead looks no different from the land behind. The same open ground, the same heat rising steadily, the same thin signals appearing and fading without commitment. What has changed is position. The animal reaches a point where distance no longer offers flexibility. The terrain ahead stretches uninterrupted for longer than before. The spacing between potential interruptions, shade, moisture, variation, has widened beyond what the body can easily absorb. The environment has not closed in. It has thinned out. Movement continues, but choice contracts. When the next signal appears, it does not arrive alone. Heat is already present. Exposure has already accumulated. Recovery has already been delayed too many times to remain optional. The opportunity is no longer early, it is late. The animal approaches without the buffer it once had. The pause at the edge is shorter than before, not because certainty has returned, but because delay now carries immediate cost. The body does not settle into assessment. It tests briefly, then shifts. This time, redirection is constrained. The path away from the signal does not open into alternatives. It funnels into sameness, flat ground, unbroken exposure. No immediate interruption. What was once a lateral choice is now a forward commitment. The animal moves on. This is the closure, not of a single option, but of a category. The system no longer presents early opportunities that can be taken or refused, without consequence. From this point forward, every signal arrives under pressure. Relief, when it appears, will already be compromised by timing. The old law depended on margin. Margin has disappeared. The animal advances into terrain where the next potential interruption lies beyond a distance that must be crossed without recovery. Heat tightens earlier. Movement requires greater economy. The body adjusts automatically, shorter steps, fewer corrections, a posture that minimizes lift. These adjustments preserve motion, but they also signal a loss. Flexibility has been traded for continuity. The environment enforces this trade without acknowledgement. It does not escalate. It simply refuses to provide replacement options for those that were deferred earlier. By the time the next depression appears, it does so under conditions the old law was not built to handle. The signal is weak. The shade is shallow. The ground offers no softness. Taking it would slow depletion, not reverse it. The animal approaches closer than before. This is not a return to alignment. It is an admission that alignment is no longer available. The pause tightens. The redirection, when it occurs, is minimal, more a sidestep than a turn. Still, the opportunity remains unused. The system registers this, not as choice, but as state. What follows is not punishment, it is inevitability. Distance ahead stretches without interruption. The animal enters a phase where movement must be maintained longer than recovery allows. The body compensates by drawing deeper on reserves that were never meant to be used continuously. Fatigue does not spike, it settles. The difference is subtle but decisive. Pauses no longer restore baseline, they merely prevent collapse. Movement resumes at a slightly reduced capacity each time, creating a downward slope that cannot be leveled under current conditions. The animal remains upright, remains mobile, remains functional. That is what makes this point irreversible. The closure does not remove survival. It removes return. The path back to earlier flexibility no longer exists. The environment behind does not offer replacements. The environment ahead offers fewer interruptions. The system has transitioned into a new phase without crossing a visible threshold. This is where correction becomes impossible. Not because the animal lacks strength or awareness, but because the timing window that allowed adjustment has passed. The rules have changed, and the transition occurred gradually enough to evade response. The animal continues forward, now governed by a narrower set of outcomes. Every future opportunity will arrive under pressure. Every decision will be made with less margin than the last. The environment has not grown harsher, it has become precise. It no longer tolerates inefficiency. It no longer absorbs delay. It no longer offers redundancy. Relief must be taken when it appears under constraint, or it must be forfeited entirely. The animal's movement reflects this precision. Paths straighten, detours vanish. Corrections are rare because they are expensive. The body commits more quickly, not because confidence has returned, but because hesitation has become unaffordable. This is not adaptation yet, it is survival under compression. As the sun reaches its height again, the animal crosses ground that offers nothing to interrupt the process. Heat accumulates without release. Shade arrives too briefly to matter. Signals thin to near absence. the system does not collapse, it locks. From this point on, the story no longer revolves around missed opportunities, it revolves around diminished ones, relief that arrives already compromised, choices that exist only in theory, and movement that must continue regardless of alignment. The old law has not been replaced, it has been rendered obsolete. And there will be no moment later when this becomes obvious in retrospect. No marker where the animal can recognize the closure and adjust accordingly. The environment has already moved on. What remains is persistence within limits that will continue to narrow as long as the rules remain mismatched. Strength once solved most problems. Mass closed distance efficiently. Endurance absorbed heat. Experience compensated for uncertainty. When conditions shifted, size and stamina provided time to wait, to correct, to endure until the environment realigned. That advantage is no longer intact. The animal continues to move, but its presence no longer reshapes the landscape around it. The ground does not yield more easily. Shade does not last longer. Signals do not strengthen in response to proximity. What once bent slightly under pressure now remains unchanged. The environment no longer negotiates. Movement becomes visibly more expensive. Each step draws from reserves already allocated elsewhere. The posture tightens, not from weakness, but from conservation. Lift reduces. Corrections are minimized. The body operates closer to baseline function, where any deviation carries immediate cost. This is the first sign of collapse, not of survival, but of dominance. The animal still occupies space, but space no longer yields advantage. Distance must be crossed at nearly the same cost, regardless of strength. Heat presses evenly. Exposure does not discriminate. The features that once amplified capability, size, endurance, persistence, now amplify demand. Large bodies hold heat longer. Long strides require more energy to sustain. Extended endurance depletes reserves without replacement. What once created efficiency now accelerates consumption. The animal encounters another potential interruption: shallow shade cast by uneven ground. A faint signal carried briefly by wind. Under earlier conditions, this would have been sufficient to pause, recover, and continue without consequence. Now, the pause changes little. Cooling is minimal. Scent dissipates quickly. The effort required to stop and resume nearly matches the effort of continuing. Relief, when taken, no longer resets the system. It merely delays decline. This is the collapse of advantage, not through failure, but through inversion. The same traits that once buffered error now magnify it. The margin that allowed patience has narrowed too far for patience to matter. Strength does not create safety, it extends exposure. The animal compensates instinctively, but compensation has limits. Movement straightens further. The path becomes more rigid. Detours disappear entirely. Exploration ceases, not because curiosity is gone, but because exploration now costs too much to justify. The environment enforces this rigidity without resistance. It does not block movement. It simply refuses to offer variation. As the day progresses, the effects accumulate. Heat settles earlier. Recovery windows shrink. The body remains functional, but effort climbs steadily beneath it. What was once sustainable becomes extractive. Another signal appears: water, present but thin. The animal approaches closer than it would have earlier, not because alignment has returned, but because the cost of refusal now outweighs the risk of engagement. The pause is brief. The decision compressed. Relief is taken, but it arrives incomplete. Moisture slows depletion but does not restore capacity. The animal withdraws, almost immediately, unwilling to linger where certainty might concentrate consequence. The advantage that once allowed patience has become liability. Time spent stationary now increases exposure. Time spent moving accelerates loss. There is no configuration where strength produces surplus. Every state is balanced on consumption. This is where experience fails. The environment no longer behaves within ranges that experience was built to manage. The old adjustments, pace, timing, route still occur, but their effects are muted. Corrections produce smaller returns. Delays produce larger penalties. The animal's continued movement reflects this imbalance. It advances steadily, but each segment yields less ground relative to effort. The distance covered no longer compensates for the energy spent to cover it. This asymmetry defines the new phase. The collapse of advantage does not result in immediate danger. There is no confrontation, no visible threat, no singular event that marks transition. The animal remains alive, mobile, capable, but its role has changed. It is no longer a presence that shapes outcome. It is a participant bound by conditions it cannot influence. Strength no longer creates options. It only prolongs engagement with constraint. As evening approaches, the body carries visible strain not as weakness, but as adaptation under pressure. Movement slows slightly, pauses lengthen, though they restore little. The animal operates closer to its limits. Where any disruption could tip the balance, the environment remains consistent. It does not escalate. It does not react. It simply continues to enforce the mismatch. The animal advances into terrain that offers fewer interruptions than before. The advantage that once allowed survival through endurance now accelerates depletion under persistence. The logic has inverted fully. This is not the end. It is the removal of leverage. From this point forward, survival will not depend on strength overcoming environment, but on whether movement can continue without error long enough for alignment to return. If it returns at all, the animal moves on under these conditions, carrying power that no longer translates into control, endurance that no longer guarantees time, and experience that no longer predicts outcome. What remains is motion without dominance, and in a system that no longer tolerates inefficiency. That distinction matters. Movement continues, but it no longer carries expectation. The terrain ahead offers no interruption significant enough to alter direction. Shade appears briefly, then dissolves. Scent arrives, fragmented, stripped of reliability. The environment does not withhold opportunity. It presents it in forms that no longer resolve imbalance. This is the world after leverage. The animal advances through it with precision born of necessity. Paths remain direct. Pauses are calculated to prevent collapse rather than enable recovery. Each segment of movement is chosen not because it promises relief, but because it minimizes loss relative to alternatives that no longer exist. The difference is subtle, but complete. Earlier phases allowed the possibility of correction. Delay could be offset. Missed opportunities could be replaced. Strength and endurance created buffers large enough to absorb error. That architecture has vanished. Now, movement exists within a closed system. Energy spent cannot be replenished fully. Distance covered does not guarantee access to better conditions ahead. Timing no longer aligns with outcome. The environment enforces continuity without progression. The animal remains upright. It continues to cross ground that would have been manageable under earlier rules. But manageability is no longer the measure. Sustainability is, and sustainability has become conditional on factors no longer predictable by instinct alone. As the day progresses, the heat settles earlier and releases later. Cooling arrives too late to matter. Recovery becomes an illusion felt briefly, then erased by continued demand. The body adjusts automatically, conserving where it can, reducing lift, straightening movement further. These adjustments maintain function, not advantage. Another signal appears late in the cycle: water, present in a form that once would have warranted immediate approach. Now, it arrives under compression. Exposure has accumulated. Options have narrowed. Taking it would slow decline without reversing it. Refusing it would deepen depletion without guarantee of replacement. The animal approaches, then passes, not because the signal is unsafe, not because it is insufficient, but because engagement no longer changes trajectory. The environment has reached a point where opportunity does not alter outcome. It only modifies rate. This is the final alignment. The animal's continued movement does not seek resolution, it preserves possibility by avoiding collapse, not by restoring balance. Survival becomes a function of timing without promise, a series of steps chosen because stopping would end everything sooner. As night approaches again, the landscape offers no comfort. Cooling remains uneven. Sound travels farther. Exposure persists. The animal chooses ground that minimizes convergence rather than maximizes relief, maintaining distance from features that concentrate attention, even when those features might slow decline. This choice does not improve conditions. It stabilizes them. The environment remains indifferent. It does not accelerate pressure or remove it. It simply maintains a state in which old rules no longer produce expected outcomes. The animal rests briefly, then rises again. Movement resumes because movement remains the only action that keeps the system from closing entirely. There is no longer a goal beyond continuation. With the return of daylight, the pattern holds. Heat arrives early. Relief arrives late. Signals arrive incomplete. The animal advances under the same constraints as the day before, carrying forward a system that has settled into mismatch. This is not failure. It is persistence without alignment. The story does not end with collapse or escape. It does not resolve into victory or loss. The animal remains part of the landscape, moving through it under rules that no longer favor its instincts. The camera widens. The terrain stretches beyond the individual path, revealing a system operating at scale. Patterns that once synchronized behavior and environment now drift out of phase. Signals still exist, but they no longer guarantee outcome. Strength still matters, but it no longer creates surplus. Experience still informs action, but it no longer predicts success. This is the condition the world has entered. Not one of sudden catastrophe, but of gradual decoupling, where inherited responses persist in environments that no longer reward them. The animal becomes one instance among many. Not unique, not central, not exceptional. It is a reference point where the consequences of mismatch become visible. As it continues forward, the question is no longer whether it will survive this stretch of ground. Survival remains possible under compression. The question is broader, and it extends beyond the individual frame. What persists when instinct no longer aligns with the environment that shaped it? The landscape offers no answer. It continues to change at a pace that does not announce itself, enforcing new terms without replacing old ones cleanly. Those who move within it must operate under rules that no longer match outcome, adapting not by improvement, but by reduction. The animal advances out of frame, still moving, still functioning, still present, yet no longer in control of the conditions that define survival. The story does not conclude. It stabilizes in uncertainty, and that uncertainty is no longer confined to a single path, a single body, or a single moment. It has become a property of the system itself, a world that does not wait for instinct to catch up,